Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Welcome into another episode of the podcast, listeners. I'm excited to be here with you again this week. And anyone who's watching the video, you'll see I literally just got a haircut today. And I was joking with my hairstylist that you can tell when someone has thin, fine, straight hair when, even if you've never seen them before in your life, you can tell that they got a haircut today. It's not about comparing like, oh, you look different than you did yesterday. It's like, oh yeah, your hair was cut today. That's how my hair is. I have very, very thin, straight, fine hair. And I always feel very silly after getting a haircut for probably about a week. So you get to see that if you're watching in the video version of this. What I want to talk about today is the concept of rewiring our brain. Like, how many times have you heard people talk about rewiring their brains? Like, or unlearning something because you're relearning, or sometimes people talk about reparenting themselves. Like, this is a real thing. And we're going to talk about exactly what does that even mean to like rewire yourself. But it can feel a little bit kind of, what does that even mean? Right? Like a little confusing. This is what's happening when we do any kind of, effort to grow or change our habits, shift, our mental state, any of that stuff. If maybe we want to have like a new energy or a better attitude about stuff, this is what's happening when we undertake all of those efforts. And so obviously between my own personal work and my career and helping other people with this stuff, this kind of expression, rewiring your brain, floats around all the time in my world. But, like I said, what does it really mean to rewire your brain? So we're going to talk about that today. And my confession for you is more about my pitfalls of forgetting how far along I am in this work, how natural it is for me to talk about these things, that's not everybody else's default mode. And there are so many examples in my life where I have rewired my brain. And because I have so effectively rewired my brain, I literally don't realize that what I'm doing or the way I'm thinking about something is vastly different, first of all, than how I used to think about it, but also vastly different from how most people think about things, and the example I've come up with is, back in 2017, when I decided to start my coaching business, I enrolled in a coaching program for myself that helped me, launch my business, like set it up, learn how to market, all the things that you need to do as a business coaching program. In order to get my business off the ground. And so that was, let's see, it's 2025 now. So was that 8 years ago now that I started getting coaching myself. And one of the things that was really taught over and over and over again in that program was to kind of be on to yourself whenever you found yourself saying something like, oh, well, that's not going to work, or I can't do that, or I wish I could blah, 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 or I'm no good at this thing. Like the kind of negative talking that is supernatural for us to say, right? Like, oh, I really stink at marketing, or, nobody's going to listen to me talk about, parenting. I'm not an expert. Those are all kinds of things that were totally normal and natural for anybody who's starting out in a new business to think. And, it's those kind of absolutes that it's not really necessarily that it's a negative thing. It's more just that it's an absolute. And I was trained through the coaching that I received in that program over and over again to really have some skepticism about any sort of absolute expression that I came up with, especially one that was like kind of defeatist about my business. So even now, reminding myself what to say to give you examples of the kind of default thinking I had back then is hard for me to do. And it feels weird in my body to say things like, well, no one's going to read an email from me. Or, no one wants to get more than one email in their inbox every week from someone like me. Or, I have no idea how to market. Or, I'm no good at convincing people to work with me or something like that. These are all things that I thought of as absolutely without even being conscious that I was thinking them, or things that I would say out loud just totally normally. And you probably have things that you say like that to yourself all the time. I can tell you I'm right on the heels of that big marketing push I do every May for the retreat, which, by the way, there are still a couple spots open. So if you're curious about that, let me know. But I hear these kinds of like talk all the time from people like, well, I can't afford to go on a retreat without even knowing how much it costs, right? Or like, I'm too busy, or my husband would never support me to do that, or it will cause, problems and fights in our marriage if I decide to go on a retreat, or that must be nice for other people, right? These are all just these kind of defeatist and absolute things that we naturally say. And that's really not what today's podcast is about at all. It's just a really great example of how easily accessible those thoughts were in my mind and how foreign they feel to me right now. And it is because I actually have rewired my brain. So the moment that, first of all, I find myself thinking, which isn't very common anymore, but when I find myself thinking like, no one's going to come on this retreat, instantaneously in my mind without intention, it's absolutely like my now natural rewiring of my brain. I instantaneously think like, well, that's not true. Or, how might that not be true? Like, it's my natural nowadays, my natural default thinking to basically call bullshit on myself with any absolute thought that I have. It's just it is my complete reflexive way of thinking about my thinking, if that makes sense. And it's just a great example of rewiring my brain. So what used to be my natural way of thinking before is no longer my natural way of thinking. And the way that I think now that's natural to me was not my natural way of thinking before. And my confession around that is how easy it is for me to forget that I worked my butt off to have the worldview that I have right now, and that most people haven't done that yet. That it's completely natural and normal and hard for people to change, their thinking that way. It's not just something that, right now when I hear a client say, oh, my husband's never going to go for that, or I can't do this unless I get permission from him, or whatever, I can't take my kid to a restaurant. It's going to backfire. It's my natural thought right afterwards is like, nah, bullshit. But that's not what is happening inside most people's brains. And it's so easy for me to forget that. And when I do, I almost kind of like jump the gun or push my client a little too fast into, facing that sort of like default thinking of theirs without understanding that, like, in order for us to think something different, we have to rewire, we have to create a new thought pattern. You can't just flip a switch and now you think differently. So it's something I have to remind myself of regularly in order to be a good coach who is able to meet my clients where they're at and not try to engage with them at a place that they're going to be 6 months from now or a year from now or whatever. So let's talk about this, like rewiring our brains. Like, what does that really mean? Let's look into this. You know, our habits and defaults, I really think of them as like well-trod neurological pathways. Like, we have thought that no one's going to come on this retreat, or no one wants to hang out with me. Let's say that's my default. Like, no one wants to hang out with me. I've probably been thinking that since I was like 5 years old. And it's this is what I mean when I say well trod. That thought is such an often traveled route in my mind that it has become totally an unimpeded, smooth, spacious superhighway that my brain uses to go very quickly from an impetus, like a situation like me thinking about having someone come over for dinner, for example, to so from that impetus to a reaction to that impetus at lightning speed. Impetus like, oh, maybe I'll have people over for dinner. Oh, well, no one wants to hang out with me. Immediately, I just did that without even thinking. It was my absolute default. This is how our brains work. Like synapses fire, and synapses that have fired over and over and over again, they become extremely quick firing. They become reflexes for us. That's what reflexes are, right? They almost are like a shortcut. This is what it means to say that your brain is a superhighway. Like these thoughts that we have, our default thoughts are superhighways. But unfortunately, you can see with my example, that's a superhighway that leads me to a totally childish reaction that keeps me from socializing with my friends. Or my example of the person who's like, I cannot take my kids to a restaurant. It's like that keeps you from ever going out to a restaurant, or teaching your kid how to go to a restaurant, or any of these things. Or when my kid looks at me this way, it means that they disrespect me. Okay, well, if I have that superhighway figured out in my mind, like these three behaviors mean that someone's disrespecting me, let's say, you can bet your butt that I'm hurtling at lightning speed from an eye roll to an reactive, that's it, give me your phone sort of response to my kid over and over and over again, because that superhighway is formed there and I haven't rewired it to think something different. So now all my kid has to do is roll their eyes and I am furious. I'm wanting to punish them. I am super triggered, right? All because of that superhighway in my mind. So when we do this like personal growth work, like when you work with a coach, for example, we are literally creating a new pathway. We're creating new connections in your brain so that when you see that eye roll in your kid, you don't necessarily have that knee-jerk reaction. And at first you might not have any other reaction. Like it might take you a minute. It's not like you now have a new default mode. At first, it's like, oh, okay, I remember I talked about this with Anne in my session. When my kid rolls their eyes, I'm calmly going to say, I noticed that you roll your eyes at me. That's really interesting. Why did you do that? For example, that's what I decided to do in my session with Anne this week. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Well, that's not going to be your default. It's going to be your knee-jerk reaction to your child. That's something you're learning. It's new. So you have to be very intentional. You have to decide, I am not going to get upset and take my kid's phone. Instead, I'm going to say, I noticed that you rolled your eyes at me. I wonder why you chose to do that. Wow, okay, this is a new thing that I am choosing. I do not have a superhighway established for that response at all. It is a response that instead of flying on my superhighway, I am making a tough choice to opt out of that superhighway and instead bushwhack my way through the jungle to create a new pathway. Every time you make that choice. So let's say I managed to do it just once today. Okay, well, that's great. I made that conscious choice. I opted out of my superhighway. And now I am, kind of going through this like jungle path that I've created for myself. That was really hard. But let's say I do it 2 times the next day. Okay, well, now this isn't the first time I've gone down this path. It's getting a little bit more, opened up. It's, maybe I took my machete already and I've chopped down some of the vines that are blocking my path and all of that stuff. So the next time I choose it, it's not quite so blocked. It's not quite so arduous to make that choice. Every time that we continue to put that new thing in practice, we are carving out a new route to a better destination, to a better outcome, to a better response. And every time that we pick our way through that, overgrown, little pathway, we're making it less overgrown. It is harder. Picking your way through a little overgrown towpath is way harder and slower and more treacherous than going down the superhighway. So it takes dedication, it takes intention, it takes courage. I would say it takes accountability. Um, but if you are doing this, well, first of all, give yourself some credit. That's a really big deal. Like, not just to choose that new pathway one time, but to continue to put in the hard work to choose the harder path over and over and over again. And eventually, the cool thing is that the more you do that, the more established the new path becomes, right? And pretty soon it's not this like overgrown jungle path anymore. It gets widened, it smooths out. Maybe someone puts street lights out, whatever. So it becomes its own new superhighway. And that old highway that you used to travel like every single day, that's what starts to get overgrown and fall into disrepair. It ceases to be your default because it's not getting used that much. It's not getting like reinforced over and over again. So when I see that eye roll over and over again, if I continue to choose to say like, wow, I notice you're rolling your eyes at me, I wonder why you're choosing to do that, that becomes my new default. And the way that I was responding to it before, which was like telling myself this horrible, mean story about my child disrespecting me and needing to be put in his place and that I'm being attacked, blah, blah, blah. That's like such an old way of thinking that it seems silly to us almost. It seems preposterous that someone would respond to the situation that way because we have this new default. And you literally have become a new version of yourself, the version of yourself that responds calmly and with curiosity when your child rolls their eyes at you. It's a whole new version of you that you couldn't even imagine maybe before. You know, that rewiring is incredibly important for great parenting. So, this is why when I was starting to come up with my confession for today's episode, I was like literally trying to remember some of the stinking thinking that I used to have when I first started my business and reminding myself of that. It literally felt weird in my body. It felt weird in my brain to think those ways that I used to think. Um, and there are so many thoughts that I used to have about myself that I never think anymore. And when I'm reminded of them, I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? But it was such a super highway for me. I wasn't thinking. It was just a default reflexive way of seeing myself that I don't anymore. And it's the same way when I look at my kids. Like when my oldest kid was about 10, 11, 12 months old, started like he was just what I would have called at that time being naughty. Like he was, going towards light switches and plugs in the wall. And I remember we had a hearth in front of our fireplace that was only like an inch tall, but it was it was made of stone. And I hated when he would play around there because I knew he was just going to slip and whack his face on this, like just this 1 inch high stone lip that was sticking up from our hearth and stuff like that. And I remember going into my pediatrician's office for his like 12-month checkup. And, I wasn't even interested in any of the health stuff that they were doing. I was like, yeah. But can I start spanking him yet? Like, is it time for me to start spanking him? Because he's doing this, he's doing that, and I can't get him to stop. He's not listening to me. I literally said, can I just start spanking him? I literally said that to my pediatrician, which now, after all the work that I've done on myself and all of the learning that I've done on my parenting, all the rewiring that I've done in my brain, is a preposterous thing to imagine coming out of my mouth. But I did say that. That's what I was thinking. Like, I remember thinking like, oh, well, this must be why people spank their kids. Like that, I used to be upset that my parents spanked me when I was a kid, but I guess that's just what happens. Your kid gets to be this age and you just have to start spanking them because that's the only choice you have. Nothing else will work. What a crazy idea that I had. Nothing else will work. I don't think that anymore at all. I would have to force myself to try to think something like that. But that was a super highway thought that I had in my brain at the time. So think about what all your default thoughts. Think about like where are the superhighways in your brain leading you to right now? When you hop on that interstate in your head, where does it spit you out? And if you don't like where that destination is, you can do something about it. Rewiring your brain is possible. And I bet you've already done it many, many times, even if it's just something simple like, oh, I know. A couple of years ago, we used to keep the cups in our kitchen in this one cup cabinet. And then we decided to reorganize the kitchen and we moved them all to the other side of the room. Well, want to guess how many times I would go to the old cabinet for glasses, every single freaking time for months and months and months. But I don't do that anymore. My default thinking is, oh, the glasses are over there. They weren't there before, and I didn't have that default thinking before, but I do now. And I would never go to the old cabinet to get glasses out. That's not what my brain thinks. So just think about, you have done this before. You have rewired your brain, whether it was like whatever, moving the glasses in your kitchen or literally moving houses. So your drive home from work is new and you have retrained your brain to this new way of being. It is possible for you to retrain your brain. You've done it before, you can do it again. And instead of it only happening when sort of quote unquote, the world forces it to happen, like you move house and so you have to have a new default route home from work. What if you brought intention to that? Think about where are the superhighways in your brain leading you to? And if you don't like that destination, imagine bringing some intention to creating and carving out some new superhighways in your brain. This is what coaching is. This is what all self-growth work is. This is what I do with my clients every day. And I can promise you, I have sessions with clients all the time where we look back to like, where were you when you first hired me? And most of the time they just shake their heads in awe at how far they've come and how they used to see the world and how they see it now. And it is actually quite beautiful. I will say it's one of the best parts of my job is that reflection. So think about it. Is it calling to you? Are you ready to carve out some new superhighways and end up in some new destinations? Because I'm here. I am ready to help you do that. And it all starts with that free discovery call you hear me talk about every week. Set it up. And I can't wait to see you pop on my calendar and talk to you all about what's going on in that big, beautiful brain of yours and what you want it to look like instead. I'll talk to you all again next week. Bye. The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.